NSF International, Public Health Agency of Canada, Sci-Fi Ontario, and the University Guelph Department of Food Science. Today's session is titled, What Your Recipe Book Forgot to Mention, Food Safety in the Home Q&A. And this session is a first for the GFSS. It's really an opportunity for you as participants and as consumers to ask questions and hear from our expert panel. I'd like to take a second. I'll just introduce myself and my colleague who will be moderating for today's session. I'm Jeremiah Scull. I'm the Intergovernmental Affairs Manager for Ontario area for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and Kate Thomas, who is the Manager for Foodborne Disease and AMR Surveillance Division and Center for Foodborne Environmental and Zoonotic Infectious Disease with Public Health Agency of Canada. I'd like to take a second, just before we get introducing our expert panel, just a few housekeeping matters. You'll note your cameras and microphones are off, and we ask that you please keep them off for this session just to reduce any distractions. The chat box will be open. Please submit any questions you may have throughout the session, and we'll be monitoring the chat box to ask the question to our expert panel. And the session is being recorded. For a copy, please email Susan at the email address indicated here, and that email address will be presented again at the end of the session today. So if you don't get it now, don't worry, you'll be able to write down that address at the end. Now, I'm very happy to introduce our expert panels. We have some great expertise to provide to you today to answer your questions. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about them. First, we have Jim Chant, a certified public health inspector and food safety consultant. Jim began his career as a public health inspector at Toronto Public Health in 1977 after completing his science degree at the University of Guelph and the Environmental Public Health Program at Ryerson University. Jim has 36 years of experience in managing and implementing public health programs activities and as a media spokesperson on food safety issues. Jim retired from Toronto Public Health in 2013 and became a food safety consultant and continued to speak on food safety issues for various media outlets. In 2014, Jim started teaching a food safety course to public health inspectors at Conestoga College School of Health and Life Sciences in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Betty Fang, Assistant Professor, the Department of Food Sciences, Purdue University. After earning master's and doctoral degrees in food science from the University of California, Davis, Dr. Betty Fang joined Purdue University in 2018 as an assistant professor of food safety. Betty's research program uses a sociological approach to explore cultural, social, and environmental factors that affect food safety barriers. Her research identifies barriers to understanding food safety risks in consumer kitchens, develops strategies that empower food handlers to make science-based decisions, and increases food safety knowledge and best practice compliance of both consumers and food handlers. Betty's research program has been productive, generating over 30 peer-reviewed journals, articles, and 10 peer-reviewed extension publications. She has authored over 50 abstracts presented at an array of scientific meetings and has delivered over 30 invited talks regionally, nationally, and internationally. Her program currently has 6 graduate student researchers and 12 undergraduate student researchers. Welcome, Dr. Betty.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Lawrence Goodrich, Leong Family Professor of Food Safety, Director for Canadian Research Institute Food Safety, and Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph. After completing a bachelor honors degree in microbiology at the University of Guelph, Lawrence completed both his master's and PhD degree in food science with an emphasis on microbial detection of foodborne pathogens, also at Guelph, before leaving for a postdoctoral fellowship to continue his training in microbial food safety in the laboratory of Dr. Michael Doyle in the Center for Food Safety at the University of Georgia. Prior to returning to Guelph, Lawrence held a faculty position at the University of Wyoming and Colorado State University. More recently, he was the Ian and Jane Monroe Chair in Food Safety in the Food Science Department at McGill University. In January 2019, Lawrence joined the Department of Food Science as director of the Canadian Research Institute for Food Safety, where he holds the Leong Family Professorship in Food Safety. Dr. Goodrich conducts research related to control and detection of pathogenic microorganisms, including bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Dr. Goodrich has published more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, and has been awarded more than $25 million in research funding from U.S., Canadian, and international funding sources. Welcome, Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Good morning.
And last but absolutely not least, Philippe Sareva, professor in hospitality management, event planning, and culinary programs at Conestoga College School of Business and Hospitality. Philippe has been cooking since 1979. He was raised and educated in France, where he graduated from culinary school. Philippe has been teaching at Conestoga since 1999. After years of cooking in various kitchens around the world, Philippe found the need to educate people about food safety. He has also taught at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Ibadan, Nigeria. Philippe is often asked to give his opinion for magazine, radio, and local news about food safety. Welcome, Philippe.
See, thank you very much.
Just the last slide before we get into the questions here. So questions from registration forms will be addressed. We did get a lot of great questions submitted. To try and get through most of the questions, we did take a look at them and consolidate questions with a common theme. And we really hope for those participants that submitted questions, you can see your questions represented in those consolidated questions. Again, please use the chat box to ask questions throughout the session, and we'll do our best, myself and Kate, to introduce those questions throughout the session. And if you have a question that you felt wasn't answered and you'd really like to know more, please do follow up. And the best way to do that would be with Susan through her email address that will again be provided at the end of the session, and we'll do our best. With that, I will now turn things over to Kate to get us started with the Q&A. Thanks. I'll just stop sharing.
Excellent. Thanks, Chair, and a big thank you to all of the panelists and all of the participants here to be part of this new and interesting and innovative Q&A that we're hosting. So to get us started, from one of the questions that was submitted, and this one will start off with you, Jim, is what, in your opinion, is the biggest food safety concern, and what do you believe is the most significant food safety error that contributes to foodborne illness?
Actually, that's a very common question that health unit usually receive. That just combining, textbook knowledge as well as experience in investigating foodborne outbreak. The most common breakdown into the either errors or concern would be the clean, separate, cook, chill, and unsafe food sources. Try to highlight a little bit more on what we usually health inspector usually observe during investigation, whether it's an outbreak of a family Christmas dinner of 10 people or over 1,000 people get sick. Remember the maple leaves outbreak, the Cronenberg outbreak from CNE, that type. It's always the inspector usually based on the knowledge of the clean, separate, cook, chill. When we walk into the site and look at everything, determine the critical control point that can lead to the cause of the foodborne illness. Clean is the most common thing that we actually observe during an investigation. Is like personal hygiene. Don't judge a restaurant by the look on how they decorate. Sometimes you walk in the kitchen, is that just a basic personal hygiene issue. Hand washing, when you ask them about hand washing, oh yeah, we do wash our hand regularly. But when you look at the hand basin, you got a pair of shoes or a cup of coffee in the sink, in the hand basin. And then you ask, how you wash your hand then? So personal hygiene is one of the big contribution to foodborne outbreak, whether it's at home or in a five-star hotel or in a mom and pop restaurant. Once you look through the personal hygiene issue and kind of food handling, how do they handle food? What is the knowledge? Because most health unit now, I think all the health unit now are mandating food certification, food safety certification for food handler, and that is a big improvement. Without that, there's no knowledge or any kind of like experience demonstrated by the food handler about that's how I handle chicken. Remember, we just talked about washing of chicken or whatever. So those are the things that the inspector look for. The second step is to separate. How do they separate food? In a commercial kitchen, very often that we see that they know after the, with the certified food handler, they know how to separate storage, like raw meat below ready to eat, cook food, or they have separate refrigeration unit to store that type of food, raw versus ready to eat, that type, to prevent cross-contamination. So separate is something that but not often that. Sometimes you walk in the kitchen investigating a foodborne illness, you see people having like chopping up chicken or slicing meat on a cutting board, and at the same time you got a fellow chef or food handler next to the person making a salad. So cross-contamination. Cook, again, there's a great improvement now in educating food handler about cooking temperature, safe cooking temperature. It's not like you adjust your oven to 250 degrees Celsius, stick it in for 3 hours, because now it's actually in the regulation, food premises regulation in Ontario, that they have to have a pro thermometer, and they have to know how to pro the internal temperature of all the food they prepare. And there's health inspector usually give out like little posters showing all different kind of internal cooking safe temperature for different type of food. So again, cooking, inadequate cooking temperature, careless cooking, or even undercooked food on purpose just because customer asking for a rare hamburger. Okay, in Ontario, that is gone. You have to cook, ground meat to an internal temperature of 7 degrees Celsius. But some customer insist, and some operators they said, "I'll cook you one." And a good example is that I investigated a person who infected with E. coli 0157. It because he insists on the cook to cook him a medium rare burger, and he was sick. He was hospitalized too. So quickly on the next two, cook and chill. Sorry, chill is again go back to the refrigeration temperature and the holding temperature. Avoid the danger zone. That's something that constantly health inspector will have problem with food handler when they investigating an outbreak, is that how long that food been sitting at room temperature. Because everybody knows the 2 hours rule. 2 hours rule doesn't mean that, well, you still got people coming into the restaurant, I'll keep it on for another 2 hours. Then it's no such thing as extended to 2 hours rule. And the 2 hours rule is very quite often food handler misunderstood what 2 hours rule means. Doesn't mean that you put food on the table, the food already at room temperature for 2 hours. No, it's 2 hours rule. It starts from the processing to finishing to display, that 2 hours, not to put something at room temperature for 2 hours. That is an incubation. There's no such thing as 2 hours rule. And the last part is unsafe food source. Good example, with the maple leaf outbreak, we link a lot of the outbreaks to restaurant, coffee shop, deli, and even nursing home and hospital, because the food already came in contaminated with listeria. Another example is the Corona burger. That's something that my final investigation before my retirement was that it linked to the bacon jam. It's not the burger, nothing to do with the burger, the cooking, everything in CNE. The bacon jam was made in a teaching school kitchen, contaminated, temperature abuse, all the way the delivery to the CNE. The bacon jam was already loaded with Staph aureus and the toxin. Okay, so even by reheating it, okay, the toxin is heat stable, and we have over 200 people sick from a Corona burger. Okay, they paid $10 to get sick from eating Corona burger. So again, the foods already came in contaminated. Okay, so so pretty much those are the most common observation or critical control point that health inspector find, observe, and can actually prove to the link to the outbreak of foodborne illness.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. I'll just open it up. Does anyone else on the panel want to add to Jim's comments related to the biggest food safety concerns? Philippe, please.
So I'm going to piggyback on what Jim just said there. And just like with bacon jam, I feel that the biggest issues that we have is people not taking precaution on the things that they deem that it doesn't going to hurt. I mean, it's a jam. It's just a topping. I'll be fine. And that's where the problems happen. I mean, I think the education of the public has been pretty good upon handling raw products and so forth. It's just those things that they now in the back of their hand don't think is dangerous. The same situation is on defrosting meats, for example. You know, when I teach sanitation, I'm astounded by the reaction of my students to which is, yeah, I just took a piece of chicken or beef and left it in my sink for all day long. I get home, you know, what can go wrong? Right. So I think to not taking away anything from Jim, but I think we need to really remember the public is the things that you think are not dangerous might still be dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. That mayonnaise that you left in a barbecue in a sunny day for 3-4 hours, that also can be risky. That potato salad can be risky. So the problem that we have is people are looking at certain food items and not to be the major risk, and they can be a major risk. So where you purchase your food, you know, about it at the farmer's market, it must be fresh. You know, the source, as you mentioned, is very important, but I would say don't take food for granted in the fact that, oh, you know, I just defrosted my fridge or it'll be fine. That is the beginning of further issues. So again, look at all of the items that potentially be hazardous if you don't respect the proper rules.
Oh, you're on mute, Kate.
Sorry, that was excellent. Anyone else on the panel that'd like to jump in on that as well? Larry?
Yeah, so I was going to say, so we heard a lot from Jim and Philippe from the consumer point of view. I want to start my comments by talking a little bit about from an industry perspective. I think a major concern is minimally processed, ready-to-eat foods, and specifically fresh produce. With meats, we can cook them. So even if there are foodborne pathogens there, and in some cases there are, cooking at the proper temperature and using a thermometer to verify will kill those. But fresh produce, we don't cook. There is no kill step. And so we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years multiple outbreaks of, for example, E. coli linked to romaine lettuce and other leafy greens. We've seen salmonella linked to whole onions, for example. I think, you know, from an industry perspective, the issue is that while many in the industry, fresh produce growers are actually progressive and proactive at implementing food safety controls, there are still some that do not, and I think that's a problem. But we also need to develop new technologies that are cost effective to help improve the safety of those foods. Another concern are foods that were never intended to be ready to eat, but yet are being consumed that way. So things like broccoli that, you know, typically were never intended to be consumed raw. Now we're seeing them being consumed raw. Things like flour, agricultural commodity that was always assumed that it would be heated in baked goods, for example. We see more and more people consuming raw cookie batter or raw cake batter. So these are actually becoming ready-to-eat foods, even if they were never intended to be. On the consumer side in the home, not much to add to what both Jim and Philippe have said. I think they both made excellent comments. The only thing I would do is focus a little bit on the fridge, especially as we come up to the holidays, where, you know, people tend to pack the fridge with all kinds of foods, leftovers and so forth, which means that air circulation may not be there may not be proper air circulation through the fridge. So you might get microclimates, and that could lead to microbial growth. Lack of using a fridge thermometer is another common issue that I see to ensure that the fridge is at proper temperature, 4 degrees Celsius. Jim talked about proper placement of food in the fridge, meat at the bottom, so it can't contaminate foods that will be consumed raw. Regular cleaning of the fridge. This is something that is something that I see, and that can lead to cross-contamination. And then one particular comment as it relates back to meat thermometers, especially at this time, as we get into the holidays, certainly American Thanksgiving and for us Christmas coming up. The pop-up, those pop-up indicators on turkeys that a lot of people rely on to indicate that the turkey is done are not reliable at all. And so, as Jim pointed out, a good meat thermometer should be used to ensure that the meats are cooked at the proper temperature. Thank you.
That's great. Betty, did you want to add anything? We had a pretty fulsome response there, but is there anything else from your perspective, or you're good?
Yeah, I will just picky right what Larry just mentioned about some trendy like food. We will say food evolution, food handling evolution. Like people start to adopt either things from the like social media influencers, or they thought it was a good idea, and all of those things. A lot of the times we still lack scientific data to show if it is the best practice or not. So just like Larry said, now a lot of times people start to get into this like trend to eat raw cookie dough. And then we conducted a content analysis, and we found that there are a lot of recipes they claim to be making ready to eat cookie dough. And what they do, some of them, they just tell people that they are not using raw eggs. They are not really telling people, actually, we also worry about another raw food commodity, flour. And there are other people would advise consumers to preheat their dry flour in an oven or even in the microwave. So they will tell you something sounds scientific because they will tell you that salmonella, we worry about salmonella, so we cook the chicken, turkey at 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So to kill salmonella, you just preheat your flour in the oven until the internal temperature reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit, which could not be true because at a like low water activity environment, the like heat resistance could be higher in salmonella. So some of those recommendations, it sounds scientific, which is even more dangerous because consumers really trust science. They trust science-based information. What if they like practice such recommendations on the social media, and they actually not put themselves at lower risk but higher risk because they felt like it's ready to eat. I did everything I could, and I learned to make myself and my kids prevent foodborne illness. So I think more and more as we evolve in our own kitchen, and especially after the pandemic, we see more and more people are more like exploratory in their kitchen, trying all different cooking tips. So I think we do need to think more from the scientific community, as well as the public health regulators, to start thinking about how we can address those.
We'll go Philippe, and then maybe we'll pass it over to Jer for another.
Just a quick one, because I both agree with Dr. Lawrence and Dr. Betty there. The ready-to-eat is a huge issue as far as I'm concerned. You know, I just had a conversation with my own family where you go to the grocery store and you buy pre-washed lettuce, and he's been pre-washed, right? He's ready to eat. How was it washed? How long ago was it washed? Was the bag, destructed in some form? So the public is putting a lot of trust in places where they don't understand properly the risk, and they fear the risk, right? They say, well, somebody else washed it, so I'm fine, instead of taking ownership of their own safety. The same thing Dr. Fan there mentioned upon the egg and the flour. I remember as a kid, everybody licks the butter bowl and is fine, the cookie dough is fine. So in the back of the head, they think, oh, I didn't get sick when I was a kid, therefore it is fine. But it is different when it was done at home, very structured area, versus manufacturing in a place where we don't know how old the eggs were and so forth. The risk factor is so much larger. I think we need to get, again, the consumer, everyone, to realize not to put trust on things just because it was that way at some point, right? So one that I use a lot, and prove you have very talented people here, maybe they'll prove me wrong, is I see people taking enormous precautions to process chicken in their house, right? They will sanitize everything. Oh, raw chicken, oh my goodness, raw chicken. And then they'll crack an egg and they just wipe the egg on the towel, and then they go and make a salad after that, right? The cracking of the egg on the side of a bowl, you see that all the time, and now you have albumin on the side of the bowl and they move on. So is the things that they don't seem to be dangerous because, it's just an egg. That I think is the risk factor that are coming more and more, and people are getting sick. The salad is a huge issue. That's why I don't eat salad myself, because the salad makes a lot of people sick. But I just wanted to say that, I feel that the people do not respect those basic information on the fridge. Every person that I go to, their fridge is set at 6 degrees, not at 4, because they don't want the salad to go bad so quickly, and therefore their thought process upon, I put it in my fridge, I'll be safe. Since it is not at the proper temperature, it has 6 or 7 degrees, that safety zone is now destroyed. Thank you.
Excellent start to our discussion today. Jerry, I'll pass over to you for the next question, please.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. That was a great first question. I think leads in well to the second question. And Larry, I'm going to ask you maybe if you can lead us off on this one. But speaking of education and things that become ingrained in us, maybe from our parents, that we just assume are, safe, right? So food safety starts with knowledge of the foods we eat. Can you comment, and again, for the whole panel, but starting with Larry, on how the educational system, primarily looking at grade school, high school, contributes to that knowledge? Because I would assume it's at the young ages where we can make a significant impact.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And thanks to whoever posted that. So in my opinion, I don't think we do a good enough job, anywhere near a good enough job of educating younger people about food safety. This is something that I actually was involved in early in my career, and something that I certainly want to get back into. I think because, so I used to go into elementary schools and do food safety training, and I'd tell the kids, pay attention and go home and tell your parents. And it's interesting because I think parents do listen to their kids. So that's a potential way to improve food safety in the home. But things like kids, as we become more urbanized, common question to ask kids: where does your food come from? And the common answer usually is the grocery store. They have no idea. They have no idea like where meat comes from, or how food is produced. And I think that's a concern because we know research shows that younger people in middle school, elementary school, high school, even college, they are overconfident in their food safety knowledge, but yet when probed, they don't know. And this is important because we're seeing, certainly college students more and more are being involved in food preparation, even in commercial establishments. And so if they don't know, and by that I mean like fast food restaurants and working in grocery stores or retail and so forth. So if they don't know the knowledge, then that's a concern. So I think we really have to do a good job, a better job of developing targeted food safety training for younger people to improve their food safety knowledge. One great example I'll share with you is between 2017 and 2019, there were a series of ongoing outbreaks in Canada linked to raw breaded poultry products and salmonella. And the concern was that the issue was that the raw breaded poultry products looked cooked. So one couldn't distinguish between what was cooked, which at the time typically were not log products, and what was raw. There were these boxes that had nice pictures on the box. People would bring home the package and throw away the box to save space, and the products would be in plastic bags that were unlabeled. A lot of the illnesses linked to college-age men, and who would put them in the microwave thinking they were cooked, put them in the microwave to heat them up, and essentially eat raw poultry. So, this is an example of how and why targeted food safety training is needed for younger people.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
actually, Jim here. Yeah, because for example, like Health Unit has some program for providing training, food safety training or workshop to kids. What we're referring to kids are usually high school kids, your first job working in McDonald's or working in a fast food uh, restaurant, and that type of exposure to food handling. Now, just using CNE in Toronto, the big show every year that we have, is that actually public health inspector is making a mandate for all food handler in working in the CNE for like say 20 days must be certified. We develop a 2 hours food safety program for kids. Like most of the kids are actually high school kids or pre-high school kids that are going to be working, handling food. It very effective when they link food safety to what they're going to be working at the food stand, and also being taught by health inspector that comes in, or people with been teaching food safety for a while. That will link the idea of food safety to working in a commercial environment. I find out personally myself that to get the attention in that kind of say mandatory type of training is easier than sit them down and try to teach them food safety just casually, family members or friends or whatever. So more program like this, health unit can develop more program, or even institution like college or university. First year, kids live on their own, cook their own food, but I don't find that any kind of like in-service or even information provided to first year student, their first time they're going to start cooking on their own or they live on their own. So there's a few other things that, public health in general can develop and provide that kind of services.
If I could add to this, I used to teach years ago, it seemed like a long time ago, a course to first-year students, as Jim just mentioned there. I think that high schools do a great job to teach the ABCs to the young people, but we forget that we have to teach them life skills. And if we look at the average first-year student going to either college or university, they're so ill-prepared to be on their own. They don't know how to shop. They don't know how to cook. They don't know how to properly be sanitary in cooking those products, because it doesn't seem to be a skill that the academia really deemed to be an important skill. That is a life skill. People are putting their life at risk by not knowing. And I think we need, as a public and we need as an institution, to do better to educate our young people coming, because a lot of them, for them, is the first time ever they cooked an egg. In the past, we were growing up, our grandparents taught us how to cook and our parents showed us how to cook in a kitchen. But due to the fact of the two people working environment, we find that less and less the students have even basic information, how to cook an egg, how to boil water. So if they don't even have that basic information at their fingertips, and we expect them to be sanitary about the whole process, not to make themselves sick, I think we need to do a better job earlier on. Like I said, maybe a grade 11 course to be added, or even as parents, we need to educate our kids to be prepared going to university and college on how to survive, how to cook in a proper way. So definitely, I do agree with that. I think we need to reintroduce programs to get first-year students when they are living on their own. And I will piggyback on what Dr. Lawrence said earlier, upon not just how to wash the vegetables, but where do these vegetables came from, the whole thing, upon going to the grocery and doing proper nutritional choices and to pick the right item and know the difference, to not look at the packaging and saying that, that product looks cooked, but read the instructions. We don't do a good job teaching them how to read food labels. Food labels are there for a reason, but if nobody knows what that reason is, it's kind of a waste of information. We need to educate people to use the tools that are at their disposal.
I'll just quickly jump in and just add one point back to the, what Philippe just said about, first-year students and they're just not trained. So I used to teach first-year undergrad students food science course, and we'd always talk about this, and they'd always have questions like, so, and it really relates around risky behavior, like smelling food and thinking that because it smells okay, it's safe to eat. Or, we had a party and we ordered pizza and that on Friday, and, the pizza's been on the countertop and it's Sunday, and we're hungry, so we'll just eat that. Like risky behaviors like that they don't understand and don't link back to their own health. Also, this is even more important when one considers that students often live in communal living spaces. So there's certainly the chance for large numbers to become ill. So I really like what Jim said about linking food safety, not just having an abstract discussion, but actually linking it back to food preparation so that they understand why this happens and they get an understanding that this is just not some theoretical discussion like one might have in a number of other courses that they take.
Great, thanks, Larry. And Betty, any comments from you?
Yeah, so again, I just feel like I agree with the above comments. There's one thing I want to share, which was like early on in my career, we conducted a series of focus group with older adults, and we asked them, so where did you learn about like food safety information? As like in their 60s or 70s, they still refer back to their middle school in their home economic classes. So unfortunately, nowadays, I don't know whether it's true in Canada, in the US, the home economic classes in most high schools or middle schools are being replaced by more like science, STEM classes. So they don't even have, a lot of the school systems don't even have home economic teachers. So all of those missing information actually would lead a long way. So now we're trying to get like food science, food safety curriculum back into the classroom through science teachers or through science classes. But again, it can be challenging because before, when they have home economic classes, they usually the school usually also have community kitchens, like experimental kitchens, so kids can pair together to cook hamburger, to cook, to learn how to cook. But now, like a lot of the remodeling, they are changing them, those facilities to other scientific laboratories. Those are good changes, but if you look for a long way, like how those missing those information could lead to future like challenges for us to change their behavior. So for food safety educators, we are not really teaching them how to do it. We are trying to change their already formed habits. It can be quite challenging. So I'm a big advocate for K to 12 food safety education. So I really think it's meaningful, even though maybe to a lot of the curriculum developers, they felt like, are you trying to waste my kids' time? But if you really look at how long we can impact them, how many years after their middle or high school, we are impacting their food handling in their own home kitchen, it's very meaningful.
Great. Thank you so much. That was great discussion. And I'll turn over to Kate for the third question.
Yeah, I think we're going to need a phase 2 for this session. It's such a great discussion going on. So the third question is going to be directed to you, Philippe. So you can take the lead on this one, and then again, we'll open it to the panel. So thinking about other food service industries or types, such as a buffet style restaurant and caterers, what are the risks to consumers, both in terms of COVID-19 and food safety? And what are the best food safety guidelines?
So I'm going to go back by my number one advice I've been given for the last 30 plus years. Anytime you go to a food establishment, before you buy anything, go and check out the washroom. If the washroom is dirty, the kitchen will be dirty. That's pretty much the simple rule. So again, don't assume anything. Take the precautions of it. One thing that we see happening a lot in the industry right now is ghost kitchens, people making takeout foods in sometimes in environments that are no longer, or even so they should be, they're not necessarily inspected by the PHIs, and therefore people is like, I can cook a samosa, I'm going to cook it at home, and I'm going to put it as a takeout and come and get my food. So you have now a lot of people in the industry that are manufacturing food, preparing food, and selling it to the public without the proper structures in place and the proper safety measures and inspections put in place. So I would recommend for everybody to do that, to do an assessment of the place that you're going in, and a visual inspection usually reveals a lot. How do we going to know, just like something Jim mentioned earlier, are the people going to wash their hands properly? Well, like I said, take a look at the vent on the ceiling. If it's full of dust, they're not putting attention to the details. And if they're not going to clean that vent that the customer can't see, how much time they're going to spend washing their hands. The other thing that I always mention also, park your car in the back of the establishment, not in the front, and take a look at the dumpster. And if you see a cook there smoking a cigarette on top of a milk crate, greasy uniform, how much attention to health and safety is he putting on in the kitchen. So too often, I think the consumer is taking a look at the product and the price, and we think that's all it is, and then they get sick. So take a look at the environment you're going in, inspect or take a quick look around, seeing if a place is sanitary at first look. Take a look if the washroom is sanitary, because it's a job that nobody seems to want to take usually to do, and therefore if they're doing it properly and they have signed they're doing it regularly, it must be something in place in the kitchen to follow health measures. Right. The next thing that I see again is in packaging, or when the server comes to you, take a look at the uniform. I mean, so often I go to locations where the customer comes to sit down and the waitress comes in, or the server, I should say, comes in, and their uniform is not sanitary. Do you think that person washed their hand before they came from clearing a table, picking up plates, cutlery, and glassware where somebody had in their mouth, and now went to the dish room, drop it off, don't wash your hands, go straight to the line, pick up a clean plate of food and brings it to you, right? So those are those things that is very difficult for the public to really have a full sense upon if that's taking place or not. But the indication of the sanitary conditions of the front of the house, or like I say, the dumpster in the back, or even secondary things like the washrooms and the vents, will give you a stronger indication if a place is at least trying all they can to keep it sanitary. When it comes to COVID, I think COVID did us a big favor in a way that he brought to the attention to the people that there are things out there that you cannot see that will make you sick. And yet there are things there that you can do to kind of prevent or minimize the risk. And those things can be quite easy, as washing your hands regularly, wearing a mask regularly. And I think some of those may remain in the industry. One of the questions in the beginning of the symposium is buffets, are they coming back? Well, I like to take a look at what is a buffet. Really, a buffet is the customer helping themselves to food that is already there. And in the past, the customer was able to grab a pair of tongs or spoons and help himself to the food. That created a lot of issues in the past of not knowing the allergens presence or cross-contaminations and things like that. Through COVID, I think the customer now is more aware of possibly putting gloves on and wearing a mask going through the buffet. That will be a solution. Personally, I think a better solution is no longer allowing the customers to be the one helping themselves to the food. Having people who are fully trained, the cooks, for example, who have a food certification, wearing the mask, wearing the gloves, and putting the food on the customer's plate. That removes a lot of the concern that we have vis-a-vis COVID and the sanitation, by now allowing only the people who are certified using the proper PPE to put the food on the plate for the guest.
Excellent. I'll open it up to the rest of the panel to add.
I think I inspect enough buffet restaurant that it's what, like Philippe said, was really true. What you don't see behind the kitchen door is just to scare the heck out of you. Unfortunately, yes, inspector, usually I told my inspectors, I said, best thing to do is don't park your car at the back entrance, but always walk through the back entrance to go in, because I did have my tire slashed before, because that's where most of the crazy activity is going on. Yes, when you walk through the back, you see the garbage, you see the rats running around. And then also when you go in, that's where the kitchen is, okay? Surprise, surprise, cigarette out the window, suddenly the hand basin, there's a long line of people pretending to wash their hand, that type. But because of intensive inspection and enforcement by local health unit, or even by inspector, even a lot of the franchise now have their own quality control inspector to go around doing that type of work. I can say that the fast food, the buffet, the restaurant business within the past 20 years as compared to before has a lots of improvement, especially when health unit introduced a rating program. You know, when you see a green sign, sure, they're doing inspection, they did pass all the inspection, right? But when you go onto the website and look at the inspection reports, oh my God, you know, the disclosure introduced transparency. Lots of operator of food business, they don't like to be shamed, not just by customer coming to your restaurant or your supermarket, but because of the rating sticks to you for months after the inspection. So that's one thing that I know it motivates a lot of food operator to say, I better do my own inspection. I used to say to them, be your own health inspector and inspect your own place daily, correct the infraction before the real inspector walk in and give you 6-7 tickets, you know. And that works because inspector can only come to do inspection 3 to 4 times a year, okay? But you are there, you're operator, you're the manager, you're the owner of the business. You can actually do your own inspection by using the inspector's report on a daily basis or even once a week. And that I can see lots of improvement in the food business itself. And COVID did bring out the change in behavior in the cleaning, so-called sanitation attitude. You know, sure, before that, the regular food premises regulation require, you know, all establishment to be, you know, clean, disinfect, surfaces, stuff like that. But COVID gives them an almost like a motivation that they have to do it. Not just wait till the inspector showed up if I open my jar of chlorine and start disinfecting. Now they realize that this is what the customer looking for. So hopefully that kind of behavior will stay with the food business, not just to put on an act saying that, okay, my place look clean. But look clean is one thing. Customer also expecting them to provide safe food and a safe environment to them.
That's great. Any other comments from Larry or Betty?
I'll just quickly comment. I just really want to re-emphasize what Philippe said. I think it was a great comment. You know, when we're talking about food safety, and you know, whenever there's a discussion about food safety, it's from the point of view of a negative, like what are the food safety concerns, what are the hazards. So what Philippe said was, you know, that you know, buffets. Because of COVID, there are some changes that could actually enhance food safety. And the main one being that it now moved away from consumers handling the food, which, you know, and we've all been to buffets. They're unregulated. You see people come up with kids even. I've seen kids touch food and throw it back in and all kinds of stuff, right? So this would actually enhance food safety and take that away. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, very early on when the pandemic hit, there was some question about whether COVID was foodborne or not. And that has largely been dealt with. It is certainly not foodborne. There's never been any evidence of that. But there's still, you know, some pockets of, you know, where there are claims that it's foodborne. So it's not, you know, so the risk of contracting COVID at a buffet has never had anything to do with the food. It simply had things to do with the fact that people were in close proximity, and it was a close proximity that people to person spread. One of the other positive changes that came with COVID is it was the installation of barriers, you know, which again, food barriers, which again, you know, can enhance food safety. And then I just want to quickly jump back to our question on school education. One thing I neglected to say was there actually are a number of programs, well-developed programs actually in the U.S. For middle school, so that actually have been and are currently implemented in the U.S. And I think us in Canada can take a page from that and adapt those programs. They're actually quite effective, and they've been evaluated and shown to be effective. So I think we can take a page from that and adapt those programs for use here in Canada.
Anything else, Betty? Did you want to add in on this, or?
Yeah, there's one thing I want to add to this like interesting topic on the risk perception to consumers in both in terms of COVID and food safety. So we have been like trying to assess how would consumer change over time during the pandemic, how much risk they feel they can get ill from like either the food safety concerns or COVID. So over time, we noticed that consumers, they don't really worry as much of getting COVID from food, which is good. But what is also interesting we found was they also lose up their handling practices. So for example, in the beginning of the pandemic, many people, like most of the people, saying that they are washing their hands with soap and they're washing longer. There could be a lot of reasons. They told us about like their peer pressure. They were afraid that in a public restroom, other people would feel like they are not as sanitary, so they would wash more. And also there are a lot of media effort telling people how important to wash hands to protect yourself. But as the pandemic goes on, we'll like lose up like our practices. So a lot of people reported that they went back to wash hands just with water only. So no, not bothering using soap because they felt like I survived for so many months. So as a food scientist, I wouldn't comment how like hand washing would impact like COVID, but hand washing, losing up their like best practices of hand washing would impact their food safety. So from that standpoint, I would say that in the beginning, a lot of the food safety educators were pretty like excited to see people's change. They started to use thermometer, make sure the food was fully cooked because people believe that the virus will be killed. And then they wash their hands more carefully. But as it goes, as the pandemic proceeded, we saw those practices went down. That's something we don't really want to see. And I think that definitely linked to the consumer's risk perception. So how we can properly communicate with the consumers. Again, the food is not going to be the vehicle to transfer the virus. However, telling them that what the benefit of continuing their best practices can be quite important, and how to really don't let them feel correlate, like handle food with preventing COVID, and also letting them know this is important to protect you and your family from foodborne illness is a challenge to a lot of the educators. Thank you.
I think that was a great discussion, Jer. We'll pass over to you for our next question.
Sure, and I think at this point, being cognizant of time, I think I'll flip to a question that we received through the chat. And Betty, maybe I'll ask you to start us off on this discussion. North America has seen an increasingly diverse population. How should cultural diversity be considered when delivering food safety awareness programs?
That's a very good question. So we do have more and more like different culture. So it's more than language. So that usually that's the first sentence I would like to say. So in the past, we have been taking effort to translate English version food safety education materials into Spanish, into some other South Asian languages. But sometimes we forgot. Other than the language difference, there could be a lot of cultural difference. how they prepare food and what they believe. So I always think it is very, very important to understand your target audience. So it's more than understand their language, but also conduct needs assessment before we even develop any materials, understand how do they actually handle their food and why they handle their food that way. So early on when we conducted like a focus group with those immigrated moms from Latin America. So we noticed that they often express that they don't know why Americans would put their egg in the refrigerator. They felt like the eggs can be put just in the room temperature. That's what we were taught to do, and they didn't know the process of egg in the United States. So it has been washed and it has to be refrigerated. So the process is different, but to them, they feel like they are just egg without understanding why putting eggs in the refrigerator, it can be a barrier. For them, they feel like, I learned this when I was in my country. We don't really need to put those in refrigerator, and refrigerator is stuffed. So I can put it just on my counter. So there are a lot of those things. I find it's quite intriguing, but unfortunately, I don't think we pay enough attention. We pay attention to the language barrier, but when it comes to food handling, preparation, sometimes it's much more than the language difference. We need to understand who they are and why they do such things. So it's not, probably we were a little bit ignorant on that part. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Betty. And I'll open it up to the rest of the panelists, as I'm sure there's comments on this one from everyone. So,
yeah, I'll just quickly jump in and say I think this question underscores why we need to have a diverse group of food safety professionals. It's the same with anything else. So the example I use is vaccines, COVID and vaccines. We know a lot of marginalized populations are suspicious of the vaccines. And to counter that, we've seen professionals who belong to those same cultural groups going into their own communities because people generally tend to trust people from their own cultural group. And I think the same thing has to happen with food safety. You know, we know certain foods from certain cultural groups can be risky. Raw milk foods, for example, that are often produced and consumed in Hispanic communities have caused outbreaks. We need Hispanic trained food safety professionals who have come from that culture, who understand the foods, to be able to communicate those messages. But also, I think as somebody else mentioned, it might have been Jim or Philippe a while back, it's not about simply just saying you can't do that, because I don't think that's realistic. You know, these are foods that people have, you know, consumed for a long time, you know, for generations. So simply saying you can't do that will not work. So really what we also need are effective ways that those foods can be enjoyed while at the same time reducing the food safety risks. So I'll stop there.
So if I can add to that, Dr. Lawrence, I appreciate that. I'm totally behind that. I teach a lot of international students now. The last couple of years, my amount of international students from all around the world already has increased. And one of the things when it comes to eggs, for example, that's a question that comes a lot because I have people from Europe, from Asia, from all over. Is not that they don't want to go by putting eggs in the fridge. It's just they don't understand why they should do it here. So their understanding upon how food is processed in Canada versus their home country, they don't have that understanding because somebody has to tell them first that here it is different. The approach upon that happened a lot in the past, and that's also maybe to answer one of the questions on the chat line there, is the fact that we seem to have a set of rules. And being a French-speaking person coming to this country 38 years ago, here's the information, it's available in French. Yeah, but it made no sense. The translation was not making any sense. I did lots of translation in lots of MDS sheets and things like that. And when you translate certain times, you lose the meaning in that translation. So sometimes we took health and safety regulations, we translate it in all those different languages, but it makes no sense to them. We need to understand their culture. We need to understand why is it that they process it that way, because if not, what happens is we created an underground society where they're going to be eating their balut eggs on the ground because you can't find it in the grocery store, and you're going to be buying, your duck eggs from the farmer without going through the CFIA because, the inspection doesn't go because I want to eat the way that I eat in my culture. So we're creating an underground that to me is a lot more dangerous because they feel excluded from the main line to which the health inspector is saying that's how the food is, and if you don't do it that way, you're a violation. We need to take a look upon how can we get you to buy into sanitation. And teaching sanitation to international students, I find that by putting them into to showing them in a way they can relate to the product. Right? Did you know that eggs in Canada are washed and the membrane is no longer there and therefore you should refrigerate? Oh, I did not know that. Could you please put them in a fridge from now on because that's the case? Oh, yes, I will do it because now I understand. And too often we expect people to land in the country and overnight to know everything they have to know that is different from their own culture. So I think we need to show, yes, I agree, we need to have more diverse public health inspectors, but I think it goes even further than that. We need to have a more deep understanding of each person's culture. Most people who are eating that way, they may not get sick in their own countries. So what makes them sick here? So we have to show them the difference upon how food is processed in this country versus theirs for them to buy into why we should treat it differently. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very true. Speaking from a health inspector point of view, again, in the old days, almost all the food safety documents or educational poster or whatever, yes, they were all in English, but they're only showing usually roast beef, fish and chips, salad or potato salad or gravy. But now you walk into most of the restaurant now, especially in a big city like Toronto, is that you don't even see roast beef or gravy anymore, but you got a big poster translated into either Spanish or Chinese or Arabic, how to cook a roast beef safely. And it doesn't make sense. I have been involved in the development of a lot of those so-called cultural food safety educational materials. Is that if you don't recognize what you're showing them, okay, they're not going to recognize or translate the food safety message to saying that, okay, I'm making, say, shawarma meat, big cone of meat, or Chinese barbecue. Why are you hanging a duck in the window? Or why can't I hang the duck in the window? Because I know how to hang it safely, cook it and hang it safely. So again, health inspectors' background change a lot. A lot of focusing on not just training on enforcement. My word of advice to all my inspector, especially with the rookie when they first started, is that, okay, you're not like an inspector with a badge, with a ticket book and a notebook, okay? You have to balance. Even the Ontario regulation is called Ontario Health Protection and Promotion Act. Remember the two words. So you, as a health inspector, when you're actually in the field doing work, you have to balance between enforcement and education. Telling people not to do something is very easy, okay? Or to do something, wash your hand, is a law, okay? But once you explain to them why certain foods should be refrigerated, egg was a good example. The other thing was bean sprouts. If you go to a Chinese restaurant, or my mom caught us eating raw bean sprout at home when we were kids, we got smacked around, okay? But why suddenly you see people putting bean sprout on salad, okay, eating it almost like raw? And then we have a big salmonella. Remember that big salmonella outbreak that actually I was involved in that investigation by closing the bean sprouts plant, because over 500 people within 2 weeks came down with salmonella food poisoning. It's all linked back to one batch of bean sprout coming out from a food processing plant. Unfortunately, people, about 90% of the people that they inspect the interviews saying that, no, I just eat it raw. I put it on my salad. I like it crunchy, you know. So once you explain to them, bean sprout is a risk product. During processing, it's very high risk of contamination. Okay. Yes, some people insist on eating it raw, so you're putting your risk on your own hand. But best way to do is to explain, saying that there is a high potential risk of contamination. Best thing to do is to cook it properly, or I even stir fry. Don't just throw it in at the end of the stir fry and serve it. You stir fry with the other food item. So the temperature, the internal temperature of the bean sprout can reach a safe temperature to kill pathogens. So again, yes, it came a long way. I remember when I first became a health inspector as a rookie in 1977, and inspector, they're like cops. You walk in there, you say, you can't do that. You didn't wash your hand. We're going to, either enforce a regulation or what. Now is that balance between health protection and promotion. Promotion is something that you explain, you give them a chance to learn why you shouldn't be doing certain thing. And it seems to be working, especially now it's more transparent now. Inspector can't just go in and say something stupid and you walk out. Now, even before my retirement, when I walk into the restaurant, there are at least 5 video camera pointing at you. Those are the surveillance video within the food business. And then you got people holding the cell phone shooting. Oh, that's the inspector. Let's shoot a video of him doing inspection. So they're looking at what you do, how you explain things to operator. And for true, and it's really true, if you don't know why, for sure you're going to repeat that offense over and over. And so again, we are highlighting in training not just the food operator, but also training for the enforcement staff that are actually enforcing the food safety regulation. And that goes a long way. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Some great insight, and I'll turn over to Kate for the next question.
Great. So I think sort of picking up on that and this idea of people have sort of done things and handled things the way they've always done and never gotten sick, whether in their home or, sort of in these more commercial settings. We have a specific question. Someone wrote in to say that their parents will sometimes store their cooked stews or soups overnight at room temperature and then bring it up to a boil and cover with a lid. So how safe is this practice? So I'm putting on my Jim Chan hat and thinking, okay, maybe we need to sort of educate on this one. So maybe, Jim, if you want to take the lead on this one, I'm just cognizant of time. We only have about 15 minutes left in our session. So if you want to take the lead, then that would be great.
I'll do a quick highlight on that kind of food prep. It's actually quite risky because a lot of the time that depending on how you cook it, a lot of the cultural cooking is that you cook that stew in an enclosed like pot or clay pot or whatever at a very high temperature for a very long time. You don't open the lid, you just leave it there. So you almost have a sterilized product within an enclosed environment that not subject to post-contamination. You let it sit around for even way over the 4 hours or 2 hours rule, even for half a day or whatever. It's still, I would say, from my personal point of view, it's still safe because it's no post-contamination risk. Okay, but the chances on nowadays, people listen to a theory. Oh, my parents keep the pot of stew in the on at room temperature overnight and eat the next day. Nothing ever happened, and they do the same thing, but they don't follow the same process. Okay, post-contamination can introduce pathogens. You let it sit at room temperature or the danger zone long enough that now you're not even keeping your food safe. You're actually incubating the food for pathogens. Actually, it's the same thing that linked back to the bacon jam investigation. When we went in and found out exactly the way they handle bacon jam, we said, because bacon fat or bacon jam becomes solid very fast if you put it in the fridge, and you cannot squeeze it on the burger. So this guy got a good idea. I'm just going to keep it at room temperature, deliver it the next day. So the incubation for that bacon jam was way over 12 hours. And then we got 200 people sick. So again, is to know how they actually process the food. If they process it according to what I just said, enclosed, sterilize the food, you let it sit without post-contamination, I would say it was safe. If not, don't do that. Thank you.
And I'll just quickly jump in because this is a perfect example of how cultural differences. So my family is originally from Guyana, which is a country in northern South America, and there's a dish. It's actually a Christmas dish. It's called pepper pot, and it's exactly what Jim explained. It's cooked in this closed pot and it's kept there. Now Guyana is a tropical country. And people will leave it on the stove. I mean, it's 90 degrees. It's tropical and it doesn't spoil. And there's even anecdotal stories about people having keeping a pepper pot going for years. And they just add. Apparently, supposedly, I've never been able to validate this, but they just put new meat in and just keep it going. So this is a perfect example of why it's important to understand different dishes and potential food safety hazards from a cultural standpoint.
So if I can butt in as a chef from over 40 years, as I always say, a little bit of information can be as dangerous as no information at all. So to go back to Dr. Lawrence, if you go to your background, the people who were doing those paper pots that way, they didn't do it on an aluminum pot. They didn't do it in a steel pot and then reheating it in a quick little way and then be safe. So there's a system, and just like Jim was mentioning, if it was cooked in a long period of time, the bacteria is killed at those temperature and reheated again for a long period of time. So the product that sits on the shelf, and yes, it is an incubation, I'm not disagreeing with that, but if it is then rewarmed or warmed up long enough at high enough of a temperature, we all learn that we're now reaching a temperature that will kill bacteria. Those back in the days of grandmas and or moms back in it, the pot was there for 3 hours, a rolling boil. Now, the problem, you have somebody coming to Canada, a young person, that, oh, my mom did that, my grandma did that, turns it into the pot. As soon as you see a couple bubbles on the side, is boiled. And now you put it on a plate and you eat it in front of a TV and you get sick. It's not because the technique does not work. Is how people perceive a technique. We can jump into the same thing with doing preserves, right? Back in the days, people did jams and preserves. They didn't have no education and they didn't get sick. But now you have people, oh, my mom did that, but I can cut down the amount of sugar. I can cut down the amount of salt. I can cut down the amount of vinegar. I do not need to cook it for that long. I don't need to sterilize everything, and I will be safe. So again, a little bit of information can be as dangerous as no information at all. I feel is more upon the people not realizing how much it took to make those particular dish that required hours upon hours in a safe environment, because that chicken or that goat that got into that pepper pot might only have been killed hours ago. Right now, today, one of the biggest problem I find is when you go to a grocery store and you buy a chicken, how long since that chicken been killed and how many bacteriums are in that chicken by the time you get it home, right? And then you decide to keep it in your fridge, which often is 6 degrees for 3 or 4 days, because as Dr. Lawrence say, it smells good still. And now you're cooking it without really cooking it long enough, hot enough, and then you get sick. So things that people used to be able to do back in the days because of freshness of a product, the sourcing of a food, the no chemical, no bacteria, they didn't use, they use natural fertilizers and so forth. You're now coming at the point that because you don't know the source of those goods, how long those goods have been out before you start a process of cooking it, you're putting yourself at a very high risk. Really is the problem is we went from a very structured method of doing certain things by controlling every single critical point, to bring that up to ASAP, knowing that chicken just got killed a few minutes ago, but knowing that they're going to cook it for that long, knowing that they're going to keep it at a rolling boil for a long period of time. Now it is technically safe. It is not what we recommend to people to do, but it's technically safe. But if you change any of those data points, you're putting yourself at risk.
Excellent. I think, Jer, I'll pass it over to you. I don't know if there's time for much more, but we can.
Yeah, I think a good way to end the Q&A here with one of the questions we had, and we thought it'd be great to hear from all of you. Maybe with 4 minutes left, so we're kind of minute each here. But your 1 or 2 top food safety recommendations for at home that you can convey to our participants today. And Jim, maybe I'll start with you.
Okay, quickly. Christmas is coming. The best recommendation for anyone to buy people's gift for cooking is that it's 3 thermometers. Okay, check your fridge temperature. Has to be 4 degrees Celsius or 40 Fahrenheit or below. Okay, so you have to have a fridge thermometer. The oven, lots of people don't realize that your oven, you set it to 200, doesn't mean it's 200. My oven at home is off by almost 50 degrees. So an oven thermometer has to be adjusted to the setting. So, and the last one, a pro thermometer. They're not, well, people refer to cooking thermometer, meat thermometer. Remember to check cooked food, the internal temperature, not to touch it, oh, it's hot, or touch it, it's cold. You check the internal temperature. Hot food hot, cold food cold. So best Christmas gift you can give to anyone. And it's cheap too, it's not expensive. Thank you.
I love that you were ready with thermometers, Jim. That's great. I'll turn over to you, Betty, for your comments.
Yes. Actually, my tip number 1 is do not wash produce using hand soap. So that was something new from the pandemic. So we conducted some content analysis on the web early pandemic, and we saw a lot of recommendations that were miscitation. So they tell people that, oh, US CDC says what, but actually they never said it. And then another thing was suggesting people to wash their produce using dish soap, hand soap, and even there are people show pictures to soak their produce in bathtub or in a dishwasher. So it sounds funny, but a lot of people, when we conduct survey, they say that they would continue doing this even after the pandemic because they feel they felt much safer, especially for those ready-to-eat leafy greens. So I would say using this platform, I really want to tell people that was not recommended, and none of the government agencies ever recommended that.
Perfect. Thanks, Betty. And next, Lawrence, and then we'll finish with Philippe.
Okay, so I want to talk about some myths, and then there's a comment made in the chat that I want to address. So quickly, some myths, and we'll start with what Betty just said. So washing produce. So a common myth is that, so we all should wash our fresh produce, number 1. Okay, I want to make that clear. But a common myth is that we can wash off harmful bacteria and so forth, and that is not true. So, so while washing fresh produce is good, it removes soil and so forth. If there's a recall of fresh produce, the best thing to do is throw it away, not think that you can wash it. Second thing is, again, reinforcing what Jim said about meat. So a second myth is that we can tell the doneness of meat by color. And that is not true. As Jim has said, we need to use the meat thermometer and cook it to the proper temperature. Third myth is that, and I often hear this a lot, people get sick. Well, it was a chicken I ate last night. I ate chicken last night, and this morning I'm sick. Actually, we can't know that. Depending on the types of foodborne illness, it can take, like in the case of Listeria monocytosis, up to 70 days after consuming a food before one gets sick. So you know, just because one becomes sick after eating a meal doesn't necessarily mean that that meal caused that illness, although it could. And then I just want to respond to a comment here about defrosting meat. And the comment is that defrosting meats for too long at room temperature has never been shown to be contributing factors to foodborne illnesses. So I will strongly disagree with that. If we don't defrost our meat properly, which should be done in the fridge, or if in the sink submerged under cold water, and that water needs to be changed regularly, what can happen is, especially if it's a turkey, for example, you know, you have the turkey will defrost at different rates. The surface defrosts first, but the inside is still frozen. So you can have lots of growth of bacteria. And we know that poultry has salmonella, can carry salmonella. So if then that poultry is not cooked properly, or if during preparation it's spread, you know, and by the way, we should not be washing our turkeys because aerosols can be spread, then that is a perfect way for foodborne illness to be spread because the bacteria can get onto foods that we consume raw. So it is absolutely imperative to defrost our foods properly. Thank you.
So for me to wrap it up, I'm just going to use something I've been using for a long time. Trust no one. Educate yourself. Don't just assume anything. Yes, I agree with the temperature for the turkey, but not just putting a meat thermometer inside the turkey and figure out the temperature, but where do you check it? Make sure you check it in the inside of the leg closest to the thigh and the breastbone there, so you get the accurate temperature. When it comes to defrosting, I see people not defrosting it properly. A turkey takes up to 5 days in the fridge to defrost properly. So you don't know where that product, how long it's been sitting at the store before you grab it. My problem I have is people buy a product that is already 2 or 3 or 4, 5, 6 days old, go home, freeze it using a wrong freezing method because your freezer at home is not capable of freezing to core in a 20-minute cycle. And then that product sits in your freezer for God knows how long, and then you try to defrost it, not following the proper procedures. Now you have a unknown time frame where bacteria could grow. So it's the unknown that's going to hurt you. You don't know if that lettuce was washed properly. You don't know if your product is cooked long enough. You don't know if that food been sitting at room temperature too long. You don't know. You don't know. The not knowing is what's going to make you sick. So educate yourself. There's plenty of resources out there. Don't trust what you read. Prove it to yourself. Do the research. Make sure that the information you're getting is accurate and backed up by science, and enjoy your food if it's cooked properly. So trust no one, educate yourself, and have a fun holiday.
Thanks, Philippe. And I'll turn it over to Kate now for to close us off.
Excellent. Well, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Jared, if you could just pull up those last couple of slides, that would be great. I think today's session, we barely scratched the surface of this topic and the questions that were submitted. So I think it was definitely well received, and a big thank you to our panelists and Jer as the co-moderator. For those who are interested in more information as well, if you're interested in receiving the recordings, Susan's email is here. Feel free to get in touch with her directly, and she can connect you and set you up with either receiving more information or receiving the recordings. Maybe the next slide, Share. I think it has the, yeah, so once again, this is a really great partnership of a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations. So a big thank you to all the folks involved with bringing you the Guelph Food Safety Seminar Series. At this time, this is our last event for 2021. So we do wish you all a very food safe and healthy end to 2021 and your winter and Christmas holidays coming up. We hope to see you again shortly in 2022 with likely, I hope we do this again early 2022, because I think it'd be a great session to follow up with again. But definitely coming in February or March, we'll have some more seminar series information. So with that, a big thank you once again to the panel. It was an excellent hour and a half discussion, and to Jer and all of the work involved, Susan behind the scenes pulling things together, Sumitra doing all of the technology. Great effort, everyone. So enjoy, go have lunch if you're here in the Ontario time zone, and stay food safe, please.